Greetings and welcome back to another Perspectives. I am here this time with Ivan, who is a citizen of Russia. I actually didn't think I'd get the opportunity to talk to a Russian. It occurred to me. But I think Russia, quite possibly, is one of the most interesting and fascinating places to talk about their range of topics, and probably won't have enough time to talk about everything. But thanks for being here, Ivan. I guess before we get into some of the recent history and what have you, I guess the first question that occurs to me is, I mean, we know the geography, of Russia, but what is a Russian? I mean, that's a good question because, for example, I know that Russians, people who live in Russia are actually, I don't know if this is still practiced, I think it is, are identified separately by their ethnicity. So if they're not, ethnic Russians, they're called something else. And the idea is, are Russians Europeans? I mean, are they part of what we could call a cultural continuum within Russia? I mean, if you go far enough east, you get a place like Yakutia, which they're not Russian, but they speak Russian. They were part of the Soviet Union. So I guess it's a very confusing question. But what the question is, what constitutes Russian identity? What makes what is a Russian?
Yeah, that's a question that it definitely not easy to answer in detail. But what I think of this is, well, in general, anyone who calls himself Russian is Russian. The same with any other identity in terms of how people want to label themselves. But in more strict sense, in traditional sense of ethnicity, well, the Russian is a Russian is I think someone who bears well, it has to deal with culture, I think. So if it's hard to be Russian and not to speak Russian language, for example, it's hard to be Russian and not be part of the larger Russian culture, that shared experience, that shared norms or something. This is a level of discussion that my English is not good enough. Please excuse me for that.
Okay.
I will try to use terms that come to my mind, but sometimes I forget the right word for an idea. So interestingly, the very same question was actively discussed inside Russia about a decade ago. So what constitutes a national idea? What makes us different? What makes us or something? And no one could come with a satisfying answer. And actually, I don't think it's possible.
A specific example. So I just mentioned Yakutia, which is a region.
Yeah.
So they speak Russian. They have to. I don't think they consider themselves Russian, even though they were part of the Soviet culture at one point in time.
I think they do. I think they have double identities. They're part Russian. They're at the same time they're Russian and they're Yakuty. Yeah, Yakuts. So maybe it would help to notice that just recently, on my vacation, I and my friends took a trip to Vladivostok, which is the
most eastern city in Russia.
Not the most eastern, most east, southeastern. It's close to the border with northern Korea, but the most eastern is Anadyr, I think, but it's small, and Magadan, which is larger. But the road there is not for the well, it okay. It's hard to travel there on your own. Let's leave it there. So we took an easy option and we went to Vladivostok. So we did about 10,000 kilometers, and we were able to look around and experience all the different geographical parts maybe of Russia, but actually in terms of culture, I don't think we experienced something substantially different from Moscow or St. Petersburg anywhere. Of course, there are some minor differences in national cultures that are ethnic minorities in the Russian Federation. The Russian Federation consists of subjects of federation. It's not uniform, but well, there are some republics or autonomous areas that I think stress more not the Russian part of their identity, but the other parts, like northern Caucasus, the mountains that are between the Black Sea and the Caspian Sea.
Right.
The Caucasus.
Yeah.
How you know. So people there traditionally live in close societies, and I think they identify more with that. But nevertheless, I think if you ask them, they'll tell you that indeed they are Russians also. So
do you think
it's
this
not
is a more legacy of the Soviet Union, or does this go even
no, I don't
further
think
back
so.
in history? Okay.
It goes much further back. So, for example, Georgia, which is not Russia
Stalin
now.
was Georgian. Yeah.
So it became part of the Russian Empire well before the Soviet Union was formed, and since then, I think, well, some time after the integration and the unification of cultures. I think most of the people who live in Georgia were Georgians on one hand, but Soviets then. But how do you distinguish that? Okay, so the Soviet Union actually was smaller than the Russian Empire, I think. It lost territory in the First World War because, for example, Finland and Poland were parts of the Russian Empire, and of course they were not part of the Soviet Union. So the official policy of the Russian Empire, as far as I understand, was the opposite of modern day multiculturalism in Europe. It was not to build a monoculture, like everyone is Russian and full stop. No, but the Russian culture was to be dominant everywhere. So this dualism persists to this day, I think. Is that helpful? Maybe I should go more in detail.
Well, I find this interesting because here you have a huge landmass that nevertheless seems to be, at the very least, linguistically united. I mean, from my understanding at least. And even you look at some of the former Soviet Union territories like Kazakhstan and some of these places, and they still all speak Russian. So,
Not so much.
not so much anymore, okay?
Not so much anymore, yeah. So it differs. For example, Belarus. Uh, everyone speaks Russian there. Everyone.
Right, but, okay, yeah. But that's,
Everyone. They have their own language.
got it.
It's actually more than one, I think. There are disputes ongoing about the true Belarusian language. Anyway, everyone speaks Russian. Take Ukraine. Almost everyone speaks Russian.
Yeah.
Take Kazakhstan. No, as far as I understand, there was time when Russians were like maybe not oppressed but frowned upon there, and since then Russian language became much less popular. So it's like what? Okay, I have a question for you. How many people in West Germany speak Russian?
I I honestly don't know. I don't think I've encountered very many Russians.
No,
I've
why?
encountered some.
Not Russians. I mean Germans.
Oh,
But
Germans. Well,
yes.
not very few. I certainly don't, and I don't think many do. And I don't think many East Germans do anymore either. In fact, I can tell you from. So I have my father's friend who he grew up in Hungary, and he had to suffer through the. I'm sure you've heard of the Hungarian Revolution and what happened there.
Yep.
He hated learning Russian, and so yeah, he learned it, but he forgot everything. He had no interest. He was forced to in school. So I think when it comes to the Russian aspect, my impression is that countries that historically just had, and I mean going further back than just the Soviet Union, historically had much stronger ties to Russian culture, have always had this Russian language aspect, whereas during the Soviet era, a lot of it was artificially imposed, like in Hungary or Poland or whatever. So yeah, in West, I don't even think in Eastern Germany very many people. Well, maybe some more people, obviously more people, but I mean there is a Russian ethnic minority in Eastern Germany, but in Western Germany there's almost nothing to my knowledge. Yeah.
No. I meant specifically West Germany because yes, I think there were like maybe not forced to, but certainly encouraged to learn Russian there
Well,
in Soviet
it
period.
was useful. I mean,
Yeah.
I mean, certainly was useful. I grew up during the well, yeah. I mean, I still remember the Soviet Union and all the and Gorbachev and all these things, and you know, I think learning Russian was a useful thing for a lot of people. But I mean, I'm curious why you're asking. Though. I mean,
So yeah, well, what my point is, uh, the older generation that learned it because of either necessity or closer ties to the Soviet Union. They still majorly speak it, or at least to some extent.
right.
But the new generations, which do not have the same circumstances, they don't. So even if Kazakhstan is well a close ally with
I think I
Russia.
understand what you mean.
Not very much people. I mean, young people are eager to learn Russian. They have their own language. They're quite happy with it.
I know, I know. Well, I mean, I think the similar situation is you could compare as Vietnam, which used to be a French colony. Now, the older generation there tended to speak French decently, but I think French is essentially all but disappeared from common use there. And
Yeah, I see the analogy.
yeah,
Although in Malaysia, I think many people still speak English quite well.
well, English, yeah, but English. I mean, English has a just a sort of is almost like a universal currency. It's useful for
Yeah,
economics and politics, and so.
yeah,
But
yeah.
French in Indochina was pretty artificial, I think, and so it disappeared
Yes,
when the French
yes, yeah,
left.
yes. I see your point. But you cross a border from Malaysia to Thailand, and the contrast is quite visible because in Thailand you can only communicate in English in large tourist areas. You go 100 miles from there, and no one
Yeah,
speaks English. Whereas in Malaysia, I had much less trouble speaking English.
but
Just an example.
okay.
Just
To,
this is very off topic. I'm sorry.
right. So it's safe to say that the countries that historically places like Belarus and uh, I imagine most Georgians still speak Russian. I would guess.
I would guess too. Yeah.
Yeah, that these countries that historically just had a longer experience in the Russian Empire probably still speak Russian. So I guess that more or less covers the question. Moving on.
Mm,
Sorry.
yeah. So there are a couple of caveats, but okay. Yeah, let's move on.
Moving on from that question, I guess the most interesting question is the perception of Russia coming from the West. It's difficult to get, I guess, accurate news. Most Western people, including myself, don't speak Russian. It tends to be filtered through a lot of different mediums, and people then, you take what you can get. I think in the West, generally speaking, Putin has been almost vilified. I don't think people have a positive opinion of him, generally speaking. And I don't think he's exceptionally good or bad from what I've read of him. But I mean, maybe we can go in a little bit about the perception of Russia from other countries, because I mean, you spent all your life in Russia, and so
Yep.
you know what it's like there, and you're
Yep.
Russian. But
Yep.
most people in the audience aren't Russian. Most people, when they do hear about Russia, they hear about it through a filter that isn't Russian, or if it is a Russian filter like RT, like that's a news station. That's usually called like Moscow propaganda. I mean, who knows? I mean, I don't know what the truth is either way, but maybe you can give your perspective on that.
Yeah. So I would like to address a few points. First, mm, if I may, I would like to tell a little parable, maybe.
Okay.
So imagine you go, you happen to be on a square and you see a group of people who are protesting the second law of thermodynamics. What do you think of them? Of course, they're idiots.
Mm.
Okay, you turn around and you see another group of people who are protesting in support of the second law of thermodynamics. What I want to say is not every discourse is like a valid one. Not every question leads to something useful. So it's not directly tied to what you've just said. It's just like to keep in mind in general, I think, because most people, in my experience, they get distracted all the time on the questions that are really not worth asking. So back to the topic. Okay, the perception of the Russia from outside of Russia. That's I am very interested to hear from you, because how do I know? Well, I do watch some YouTube videos. I get something somewhere, but in general, it's the exact opposite. Just as you said, I am inside the Russian, culture, Russian bubble, you could say, inside the Iron Curtain, on the new type, and I have perception of the West, well, generally speaking, that is definitely not accurate, because, well, how can it be? But I try to maintain a neutral, skeptical, view of, well, as much as I can do, and I try to do the same in the realm of a perspective of Russia from outside of Russia. I imagine myself in, I don't know, in Germany. How would I perceive Russia if I were German? But it's a thought experiment. Of course, I can't do that in reality. So, okay, you mentioned Putin. Yesterday, I have watched an episode of Upfront. It's Al Jazeera's show, and they were interviewing Garry Kasparov, who is, of course, a chess champion, and well, he's in a fierce opposition to Putin personally, I would say. So this is nothing new, but I was, well, quite astounded at the level of hatred, vilification, and demonization. Like, he almost said that Putin, I don't know, eats children for breakfast. That was what he stopped short of that, but you could imagine the attitude. And, well, no facts, of course, were mentioned, just feelings. So, in terms of moral categories, good and bad, what's good, what's bad, that depends on what criteria do you set. So, in terms of liberal values, as they are understood now in the West in general, well, Putin is not a champion of that. You can't deny that. Although the situation is quite exaggerated, as far as I understand, in the media in the West. For example, the gay question. It's like, well, please tell me, from what you have seen in the media, what do you think is happening with gays in Russia? What's the status of gays in Russia, or something like that? What are they prosecuted? Are they oppressed? It was a big deal a couple of years ago. The Olympics in Sochi were almost, well, you get, I think, what I mean. So it was a big deal that Russia is oppressing gay people. Is that correct?
I don't even know. I don't really find the question particularly coherent, and that's not your fault. I mean, not acknowledging something like gay marriage is that suppression? I don't really, or oppression? I don't really know. It's I mean, obviously, Russian culture by necessity is going to be more conservative than Western culture. I mean, you don't have things like progressivism and this kind of silly bullshit. So, yeah, they're gonna. I mean, I guess, yeah. I mean, I guess your typical liberal Western person would say Russia and gay, it's bad situation for them, maybe. But I mean, I don't personally pay very much attention to extremely liberal people and their views. So, I recognize that Russia's a different place, and that's enough.
Yeah. So, okay. My point was that the situation is much more nuanced. So yes, gay marriage is not in the law, but as far as I understand, civil unions are permitted. No one gives a shit. Just sorry for a bad word. No one cares about gay people in Russia. In Russia, the only ones who care about gay people in Russia are people outside of Russia. So I'm not gay personally. So that's maybe that's worth mentioning. But as far as I understand, there is no oppression going on. No. There are, well, there are people who will oppress anyone based on anything. I mean, just not in the power, just ordinary people, just not oppress, bully. There are bullies. They will oppress you if you're gay. They will bully you if you're gay. They will bully you if you wear glasses. They will bully you if you don't wear glasses. Anything. They just bullies. They don't care. In terms of official policy and just day-to-day life, it's okay. It's nothing to. Yes, it doesn't worth mentioning. The gay people live here just like everyone else. I haven't seen the misogyny argument, and that's right. That's correct, because the gender equality in Russia is, I think, is, well, it maybe not perfect, but is very developed. Actually, since early on in Soviet Union, like in 1918, well, a couple of years from revolution, the women have been granted all the rights already, like everything. And actually, about the progressives, well, early communists were very progressive for their time.
Yeah, but I think there's a
They wanted to abolish marriage altogether, for example. It didn't
right,
fly. But anyway,
but
there are progressive people in Russian now, just like in Europe. Yes, they they don't like the conservative direction that the country is taking now. But this is oversimplified again. You have to be more nuanced. There are some progressive things. Progressive, I don't mean progressive in terms of safe spaces. I mean progressive in terms of actual progress. For example, um, there is slow but steady transition to how do I say it? Making more government things accessible through the internet, just like in Estonia that you have been talking not very much time ago. Maybe not to this extent, but you can do very much from home now in terms of government functions. Another example, the internet itself and the mobile phone service. It's cheaper, it's faster, it's more reliable in the populated areas, I should add. So in the European part of Russia, and especially in Moscow, St. Petersburg, and large cities. Okay, there is no comparison. I've been to Europe, and it's I don't know, not day and night, but it's actually more progressive, is what I'm saying. In terms of energy grid, it's not a popular topic to discuss because it doesn't include feelings. But well, for example, in Russia we have a unified electrical grid for the whole country. So if something if some power plant fails somewhere, its load will be picked up automatically by other plants, and no blackouts will be experienced by anyone. And it's an argument against maybe classical libertarians who want everything privatized and competition everywhere. No, I strongly believe that this unified enterprise is much more effective than hundreds of independent energy companies.
Right. Okay, so before we get too
Yeah.
off topic, I'm sorry, I'm going to have to intervene and try to steer it back on. I
Yeah,
think
excuse me.
right, it's no problem. So the issue at hand with regards, I agree with you. You know, the definition of progressivism has been a bit distorted and polluted in the West. But I mean, I imagine Russian life is still relatively difficult compared to life in places like Western Europe and North America, the United States and Canada. And I think what we see is a kind of recurrent feature that societies that don't have it as easy as some of these Western societies, they don't have the luxury of falling for some of this sort of neo-progressivism sort of bullshit. So I agree with you about this other stuff. I mean, it's progressive to talk about grid energy and these things, but these days progressivism in the West is synonymous with just sort of almost sort of hysteria about nonsense.
Yeah.
And
I can definitely see that, and
you don't have that in Russia. I think that's a major distinction.
we not on the same scale, no, but we have moral panics sometimes as well. For example, maybe of different nature. Just for example, instead of the patriarchy and misogyny and the rape culture, which didn't fly here, we have the looming danger of pedophilia. Pedophiles are everywhere, and I see a couple of reasons for that. The first one being that people in general are susceptible for those kinds of moral panics everywhere. And the second reason is the political one. So we have, of course, two chambers of parliament. How do you say it? So the publicly elected and the lower house and the Senate, who are appointed. So the Duma, so, which is elected, the lower house of Senate of Parliament, are notoriously inept in I don't know, in the last decade or so, in addressing anything that's not bullshit, but very infamous in addressing some nonsensical things, and it's actually has a rational explanation, which I won't go very far into, but it's in a nutshell, it's because the Duma has no power, no real power anyway, but to be re-elected, you have to be the biggest clown in the circus. So combining these two things, we have pretty stupid laws passing and getting signed, and not very much real reforms that may be needed. So I don't know. Should we go into politics and economics, or maybe?
Well, to some degree, I mean, certainly there's an impression in the West that post-Soviet Union Russia has become a situation where you have the really, really wealthy and I mean, of course, there's some middle class, but there's just a lot more poverty. I mean, this is the impression, at least.
Yeah.
A sort of divided society, as it were.
Yeah. Of course, yes. And as far as I understand, in Soviet Union, the extent was much smaller. So the divide between the proletariat and the nomenclature, of course, existed, but it didn't have an how do I say it? It didn't have a monetary value to it. It had it was about the access to luxury goods. It was about the cars, the mansions, something like that. But those mansions were not privately owned. It was the access to a lifestyle that's more comfortable or more high level. I don't know, more prestigious, more VIP, more luxurious. But yes, now we have capitalism here, and the first stage in the early 90s was quite unfair, and the economic disparity has its roots in the auctions, that the privatization. So you have everything that's owned by the state, and you have to somehow make it so the whole plants, factories, the businesses that were not businesses but now will be businesses, they have to get an owner. And the auctions that were held, it's widely believed, it's almost an accepted fact that they were very much rigged, and the those oligarchs came directly from that. But then again, what do you have in the United States, for example?
Well, structurally.
I mean the disparity, the economic disparity that's between the most rich and all the rest. So
Well, it's always like that. That most of the wealth is concentrated in a very small percentage.
yeah. So I don't think that Russia is unique in that.
No. Yeah, but there. I mean, this is just what I'm just sort of repeating the Western perception. It isn't necessarily my perception, but
Yes, of course, I understand that, and I'm trying to comment on that.
I
So
mean, effectively, you're painting a picture, if I might. Well, Russia isn't all that different from any other, European or maybe European country or the United States. It's just a lot of it's painted in a different light. That's the impression I'm getting based on what you're saying.
yes, the culture is somewhat different. The culture, the
Alcoholism,
some
or prevalent,
something
I don't know.
alcoholism is not. I mean, yes, it's widespread, but if you look at the statistics, then per capita we are not in the first place. I believe it's France or maybe Ireland.
Actually, South Korea has the most alcoholics, but anyway, yeah.
Yeah. So okay, I have an analogy to make. So, did you read Tolkien's Lord of the Rings?
Sure. Yeah, a long time ago I did, yeah.
Yeah. Do you remember orcs and the Mordor and the evil?
Sure.
Yeah.
Well, I think I understand what you're talking about.
Yes, what would you I mean, I guess most of the West looks at Russia and sees the
Yeah.
Sauron's eye and the country of orcs.
Let me try
But
to summarize what you're saying. I think I might be able to do it. Look, historically, largely because of the communist era and the Cold War, it was a useful political tool, particularly for the American state, to paint relationships between countries in what could almost be called a divine light of extreme polarity, which is to say moral polarity. You'd have good and evil. I mean, you saw this in there were a lot of films that were released in the '80s, and I still remember them because I was a child of the '80s. Of even Rambo, fighting against the communists in Afghanistan, and so that residue has remained. I think is this idea that I don't think it's legitimate. I think it's a lot of propaganda, but that residue has remained. The idea that there's a sort of good and bad in a sort of absolute sense that
yeah,
divides the East and the West. And of course, Russia is still painted, uh, cast in that light, unfortunately. And I just think that's a leftover that might never go away. I mean, after all, we're talking about decades and decades of a legacy of two countries that quite came very close to destroying the world in some sense. So it's I don't think that's going away. It doesn't mean that every Westerner believes that. I certainly don't believe that. I think at the end of the day, people are people, you know. So
yeah. Well, it's of course true, but that's the end of the conversation. Yeah, people are people, and that's it.
well, no. I don't mean that. People are people in that trying to uh, paint a portrait of a country where there's a sort of absolute evil or an absolute good is silly because it doesn't describe human beings accurately.
Yes, that's a very interesting point because, for example, Nazi Germany is painted universally is painted as absolute evil, and actually, not very much people are interested in taking a more nuanced view. Uh, I would prefer not to go deeper into that, but uh, yes, of course, there is no absolute good or absolute evil. There are no absolute morality anyway. Ethics and morality are relative. So define evil, define good, then you can make a comparison.
Well, I guess what I was saying is that the way that the American state proceeded during the years of the Cold War was to very decidedly put cast the USSR and all of its associates in a negative light, and a sort of cosmic battle of good. It was always useful. I mean, Reagan practiced this. It was a useful political tool, and throughout the Cold War, I mean, it wasn't the Cold War was waged on many fronts in Africa and South America and Southeast Asia, and so in order for the propagandists to succeed, this idea of the red threat, you had to almost, I suppose, if you're a politician, use these very polarizing terms to describe things. But
Yes, it's very effective, but it's not very charitable.
no, of course not. It's not. It's meant to be the opposite of charitable. It's meant to be horrible. I mean, Russians bad, Americans good kind of thing.
Yeah. Interestingly, I don't particularly remember the the same level of polarizing divides
I do.
from our
Oh,
side.
right.
It just was not mentioned very much. It was like, okay, we are building communism here. They can do whatever they want.
Yeah. Well, I think the difference might be just in how our societies were structured. So in the United States, like I said, I grew up during the '80s, so still the Soviet era. There was the illusion, and it continues today, of sort of a free media of report, and everyone can say what they want. But of course, a
Yeah.
lot of it was always underlined by this, by the general trend of the state, which was to paint everything in an evil light. I mean, you look at films like Rocky Four. I don't know if you've ever seen that film, but the metaphors there are really interesting. If you actually look at the film, I can describe it. I mean, you have an
No,
American.
I haven't, but
You've maybe heard of it. You have this sort of American born and bred and raised in the streets of Philadelphia, a son of an immigrant, Italian American. His friend is killed by a Russian guy who plays a Russian at least, and he's willing to go to the USSR to fight him in a boxing match. And the idea, which I think is really fascinating in that film, retrospectively, is when Rocky is training for this boxing match, they put him, I think they'd send him to Siberia. He has to train in the cold and the mountains. He has no modern technology. And I think it's a kind of a reference to this natural, pure ability to overcome obstacles and difficulties. The Russian, in film he's portrayed as a Russian. The Russian guy, on the other hand, has all this modern technology. These machines that they're attaching to him, and during the match, he's the underdog. Everyone thinks he's going to lose, and yet he's technically he's not as good. Technically he's not as strong, but he draws upon this almost as a faith factor, and he draws upon his energy, and he eventually beats him, and the crowd in Moscow start cheering him on, and I mean this is the type of of state-driven Hollywood propaganda that was just
yeah.
enormously popular in the 1980s in the United States, and it worked on a lot of people. I remember going to school in the 80s, and even in the early 90s, where there were a couple of people who were, children of Russian immigrants, and people would call them commies. So I think it was very effective, and that's a residue that a lot of people still remember. And I didn't really ever have an opinion on Russians per se. If you go far enough back, I have some ancestor that was in the Tsar's army in the 19th century, but on my mother's side. But I don't, I have no relationship to it directly. But I think that kind of thing is that legacy has created, well, at least helped to create this lasting impact on the Western Eastern relations in that regard. People just think they still have that in their mind, you know. The end. Another example. The end of, I believe it's Rambo 3 or 4. I don't recall. He's sent to Afghanistan to fight the quote unquote commies, the Russians. He's aiding the Taliban, and at the end of the film in the credits says this is dedicated to the brave freedom fighters of the Taliban. I mean, all propaganda. And the 80s was just full of this stuff. And I think this is just can explain very much the background of what goes into the current view of Russia.
Yeah, couple of points to make. I don't think it started in the 80s. I think it
No, no,
started
I'm not saying
much,
it does. I
much
agree.
earlier.
It's just I
Yes,
lived through the 80s, so I could remember it. I was
yeah, yeah,
born in
yeah.
the 70s, but I don't remember the 60s. I wasn't there, you know.
Well, yes, but the media, the not the whole, but the notable examples of the media is available. I mean, are available. Anyway, the second point is you can go much closer to the present moment. There is a film about the 2006 Georgian War. I believe it's called 12 Days of Summer or something like that, which paints should I say a very one-sided picture and maybe not tells the story correctly. Um, I didn't see it, but I've seen a review of it, and the the impression it left on me is, well, it's actually maybe the same level of propaganda, maybe even more. Um, the Russians are evil monsters. They will kill civilians. They will bomb weddings. They will commit atrocities for no reason. They're that bad. They're that evil. They're Russians. Well, case closed.
Mm. Well, yeah, I mean, and this is once again. I mean, I wasn't making the claim. I should clarify or
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
because
Of course. I
the
mean to.
80s were unique, and I remember this directly as someone who watched these films, who
Yeah,
at the
yeah,
time
yeah,
as a
yeah.
child didn't really understand it, and only years later in the 90s reflected on it and said, this is really strange. I think this is ongoing. They'll never, I don't think, well, not in our lifetime at least. There won't be, perfect relationship between Russia and the United States. And I think this will always be the case. I mean, like I said, I'm very neutral about Russia. I don't even know if I'm the right person to ask about because I don't really have a well-developed opinion on it. It's one of the few countries I've never actually visited. I've only known a few Russians, and generally speaking, I just, I think it's interesting. I kind of regret not learning Russian. That's one thing I could admit to. But the West will never change its perception, at least the way the media portrays things of Russia.
Well, never say never, but yeah, I don't see any how do you say it, presuppositions for any preconditions for doing that, anything changing right now. But interestingly, uh, there was a time like 5 years ago when I think the West was viewed very positively in Russia. It has changed now, but I mean, like I said, okay, propaganda in the Soviet Union, of course, existed too, of course,
Right.
but it didn't. I don't think it painted Soviets as warriors of light, and Americans, for example, as the evil forces that
I can
should be
explain why.
destroyed.
Yeah, I think I might know the reason why. So, one of communism's biggest issues, of course, was religion of whatever sort. Get rid of it, get rid of official, Christianity and what have you. the United States in particular has had a long, remains so, a long history of religiosity and particularly Christian religiosity. So I guess if you're trying to craft a piece of political propaganda, you need one that resonates with the native population. So to paint a picture, a polarizing picture of of good and evil and this sort of thing, it's very useful to draw upon that because so many people are religious. Whereas in Russia, I would imagine, you have to tell me, religion doesn't or did not play the same role that it continues to play in the United States, where people go to church regularly. And so I think there's a critical difference there, perhaps, that allowed the United States, or maybe just almost forced the United States, in creating its propaganda to say, well, look, what's a good way of approaching this problem? Okay, we'll use sort of almost a sort of Satan God analogy here. Do you see what I mean?
Of course, yeah. Um, Concerning the religion, yeah, my estimate is at the core, most Russians are still atheists. So there was, okay, when when there was a war on religion in Soviet Union, there were periods that it was on and off. When the war was the war in quotes, of course, like the oppression of the religious folks were intensified. It became a political statement to become religious. It was just, if you oppose the evil empire inside this evil empire, what do? Okay, you go to church. It's like duh. And in general, so the biggest flaw of the Soviet Union was that the levels of outright bullshit were enormous. So no one believed anyone the government said. Anything was implied to be false, or at least misleading, uh, by the population.
I heard that. Wasn't there an
Yeah,
underground radio network that, or yeah, something like that, that tried to report the actual proper news?
maybe, but I personally don't know anything about it. And as a side note, it would be trivial to stop that. The radio signal is notoriously easy to triangulate, and you know.
Yeah. Well, in any
Oh,
event, it's a testament to
yeah,
Americans.
there was much larger movement of samizdat, where people use typewriters and copy paper to make an alternative to the official press. There were, I think, there was not very much regular. I mean, like newspapers or magazines, but the forbidden books were printed this way and distributed, and the music that was banned officially was smuggled in and circulated widely. So uh, there was the population were not brainwashed zombies. The population actually
We're skeptical.
yeah, they knew what's going on. They knew that this communism narrative is probably not gonna happen.
Well, and I
They
think this is a contrast to the United States. I think the American population throughout the Cold War was much more gullible than the Russian population.
maybe.
I'm almost certain. I mean, the way people bought into the propaganda. I remember the kind of flag waving growing up, and even in New York City, which wasn't a particularly American place, if you want to call it that. Very strange, and I think Yeah, I guess it's to the credit of the Russian people that they were a little bit more skeptical about some of the things going on.
Yeah, it's worth respect, but I mean, at the core of it, the so as I've told you in the private chat, when I was little, I was taught in school and in every official, I mean, posters, newspapers, everywhere, that okay, we're still heading full speed towards the communism. The imperialist countries are doomed. That our victory is for sure, and so on, and that our country is a world's champion in freedom, in equality, in rights for workers, and so on. Then the Soviet Union. And at that time, I was already skeptical about that because, on the one hand, for example, in the classroom, you were told one things, but at home or in non-official settings, you were told the opposite things, and that helps to question more. So after the Soviet Union collapsed, suddenly America is our best friend. We should copy it in every detail. We should accept that the free market is the only solution to all our problems. And that was taught universally. That was taught officially. That was taught unofficially. That was much harder to overcome later. So for the longest time, I didn't actually hate communist past. We don't have that guilt like in Germany, I think. So when someone brings Stalin's atrocity, yes, we acknowledge the atrocities, but we don't feel personal guilt
Yeah, I mean, I
for
might be able to
that.
explain that. I mean, I'm much more familiar with German history, so
Yeah.
I think there's a. I think when people think of Stalin's atrocities, which if you just go by sheer body count, were worse than what happened under the Nazi regime,
Yeah.
it was almost sort of. I think people look at it even in the West as just a sort of a bunch of political apparatchiks, just a bunch of politicians doing really bad stuff. When people look at the German well, it's not recent, World War II history and what have you, they see a degree of complicity and involvement that is not attributed to some of Stalin's atrocities. So Stalin gave the order to do, X, Y, Z, and it happens. Whereas, and whether this is accurate or not is questionable. But I think the degree of complicity and involvement is what people at least perceive as a differentiating factor. So yes, Stalin was absolutely horrible, but it was mostly him and his political lackeys doing it. Whereas in Germany, it was just this almost wholesale societal involvement in these activities, and I think ultimately that's what's partially responsible for some of these differences.
No. I don't think that statement is correct
Okay.
for two reasons. First, in Stalin's time, the level of complicity, as you call it, was at least on par in Soviet Union. I can tell you that when, for example, the father of the family was declared the enemy of the state, enemy of the people, its family denounced him because they believed he was actually, a bad person.
Mm.
Not just any old bad person, but a horrible person that is worth of whatever happens to him next. The population then in 30s and 40s were much less critical than if we talk about the late Soviet Union. And the second is, again, you have characterized Nazi Germany as absolutely horrible.
No, I haven't.
Absolutely
I didn't
horrible.
say that. I mean, are you
No,
saying
no,
the
no.
West?
Okay, not. Excuse me. Yes.
Let's be
You
clear.
you use the words. You use the words. It's not your words,
Right,
but
but I mean,
I oppose this concept of absolute.
well, I would
Absolute
agree with
horror.
you. And look, in the West, the other.
Oh, maybe. So, sorry. Actually, you have said that. Not you have said your opinion. You just said the words Stalin was absolutely horrible.
Well, the things he did objectively, the amount of death and destruction he caused, I mean, not exactly
Yes,
a great thing.
but on the one hand, yes, he killed many people. Yes, no one condones that. Everyone opposes that now. On the other hand, he took the mostly agrarian country with, I think, which was mostly literate and quite backwards, and he left it with, well, very industrialized with nuclear weapons and.
Yeah, I mean, look, you can take different perspectives. You can
Yes,
say
you can
Stalin was a
acknowledge.
great man.
No, you.
I mean, look,
What?
do you
What?
recognize my Skype portrait? That's actually Stalin as a child.
Oh, I didn't.
Yeah, that's
Uh,
Stalin. That's the young Stalin. So I
yeah.
mean,
Okay.
he's an interesting character, but
Yes, but what? That's just about the second law of thermodynamics. Why do anyone is so insistent on assigning moral categories? Why do we need to call him good or bad at all? Why can't we
well, I mean, we can have a
the
debate, a philosophical debate about that. I think that's to be honest, that's separate from the topic of Russia.
yes,
I mean,
of
if you
course.
want, but
But I wanted to point out that uh, even in Russia, this debate is never ending. Some people call other people Stalinists. Other people call other people fascists, and so on. I mean, what good do those labels do? Why don't we do away with that and learn history in its entirety and acknowledge all the facts and not pick out the ones that
well,
are touch our feelings more.
and related to this,
Of course, the mass genocide is 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 very emotionally how do you say it? Is charged. It's not easy to ignore.
I don't know. Wasn't it Stalin? I don't know if it's been lost in translation, but it said in the West that Stalin was quoted as saying, the death of one person is a tragedy. The death of a million people is a statistic. So I think, if anything, people, and let's be frank, I mean, most people in the West don't. I wanted to actually explain this difference between, say, Nazi Germany and Stalinist Russia. Most people in the West didn't give a shit about what happened in Russia, frankly speaking, during the Stalin era and what he did. On the other hand, there's been just massive look. The way Germans feel today, a lot of that is self-imposed, but there are other factors. It's impossible to really talk about this without mentioning the fact that there's an enormous Jewish presence in media, and whether you want to call it manipulation or not, it's sort of I can understand their perspective of sort of wanting to paint this as the most horrible thing, whatever, if they feel sort of personally affected by it. But you didn't have that, and to my knowledge, there's no significant not well actually that's not true. There are a lot of wealthy Russians who are Jewish, but that same degree of media influence, where there are films about the events of World War II, and there are documentaries, and When
Stop you there.
okay,
No,
please.
no, we do.
Okay.
We maybe even more.
But we
Um,
Westerners don't care about that stuff. I mean, I to my your typical say your typical Western Jewish media pundit or wealthy Jewish person doesn't really. I mean, I guess it's just less topical. They don't feel personally. I don't know. I have no idea what they think exactly, but they probably feel less connected to the events of Russia than they do to quote unquote Nazi Germany. I don't know. I think a lot of the guilt that Germans feel is self-imposed, but it's also a consequence of being bombarded uh, by certain influences, and
yes, yes, I
and
can see that. Yes.
yeah, and so there's a difference there, I think.
Um, okay, so in Russia we have like liberal media that paints the similar picture with Stalin's Russia. So it's a controversial topic in Russia today. I mean, controversial is maybe not the right word. Many similarities to the Nazi Germany. I mean, it's a it's a universally accepted point of view that Stalin was absolutely horrible. Stop. End of conversation. That's all. Absolutely horrible. This narrative is uh, well, it's not. Um, it doesn't come from the people
Right.
themselves. It's formed somewhere and then pushed to the people, just like
Well,
you've described with the German context.
well,
So
I agree, and I mean this is propaganda. I remember, in I guess it was the early 2000s, I got into a conversation with a person. I was just visiting in New York at the time. Who I don't know how I got in a conversation. What I studied and blah blah blah. I studied German, lived in Germany, and the person got really angry at me, because Germany and its past and whatever. And I said, "Well, have you ever been to Germany?" And he was like, "Well, I never would step foot in Germany because I think the person turned out to be Jewish. That might explain some things, but there's a kind of, like I said, this polarizing factor.
yeah,
But Ivan, if I might make a point here, most normal people don't think of the entirety of the picture. So you made a valid point. Stalin industrialized an agrarian society. Okay, that's a point. If you wanted to be really objective, you can say what was the value of Russian industrialization versus the body count versus all the deaths that might be associated with that. But
how do you
people,
measure that?
I don't know how you measure that, but
You
people
don't measure that.
exactly. You don't measure that. That's my point. It's precisely my point. People don't do that. They just say they just look at the bodies. They look at the tens of millions of people that died in the gulags, and then they think, well, he was a bad guy.
Yeah, that's exactly what I was trying to say.
Yeah.
So you have a hot topic, and you have uh, okay, no, you have a picture. Uh, you have a naked female body, beautiful female naked body in this picture, and you have a bunch of other stuff. It's like that. You're just focusing on one thing, and you're not very interested in the other. So,
Well, I
okay,
think
I
mass
think
death interests people more than the details of industrialization, for example. I mean, most people react emotionally. It's not as if people would, they're not thinking,
yes, that's right. Most people react emotionally.
yeah, but I mean, so I understand their perspective. I mean,
Yes, I too.
I
But
also understand why this girl I was talking to called me a Nazi, even though I have no association with Nazis whatsoever. I mean, I get it. It all comes from a place of emotion, but um, yeah, what are you going to do? That's just human nature, right? Yeah, you can talk in
well,
a
yes, just like that, we can talk, and our audience maybe may draw some conclusions, and maybe stop thinking with black and white, or actually just pure black and nothing else sort of mindset. Some
Well, I think the audience is nuanced enough to think in gray rather than black and white. I don't think anyone in my audience just completely buys the Western style propaganda about Russia or similar topics. I can't imagine that.
Yeah,
And
that would be great. Of course, yes.
but
I meant in the broad sense, not
oh,
just.
oh no, and I would say in the broad sense too. I mean, obviously there are many people with many different views, sometimes very vastly different opinions and polar opposite opinions. But
Yeah.
I don't think anyone just thinks, Russia is bad or anything like that. It's a very
No, no,
simplistic
no,
view.
no. Well, actually, I think some people may, but of course they are not in the majority. But yeah, in terms of today's Russia, I think the narrative now is that not exactly Russia is pure evil, but that Putin is this evil dictator who is constantly uh, aggressing against neighboring countries, and look at Syria and whatnot. And look, I'm not an apologist for Russia or for Putin. I'm very skeptical of my country. I'm not a patriot by any means. I just I just want to, you know, fight for the truth, because it sounds silly, I know, but I see some opinions that are one-sided, not very factual, and um, uh, what it would be good that to correct these opinions, maybe, and something like that.
I agree
Hope
with
you,
you.
yes. So I don't know. Would you like to discuss the Crimea, for example?
We can discuss it. I mean, yeah, if you're interested in talking about I mean, I guess for me, I try to be relatively apolitical. I'm not, terribly interested in these really polarized political views.
Yeah, okay. So let's just drop politics then.
Okay.
It's not my favorite topic either. Uh, so maybe let's get back to the culture. What do you want to? What's your
Well,
favorite topic? Maybe I don't know.
I don't really have a favorite topic. Although a friend of mine asked in advance, and so this is his question, not mine. He wanted me to ask you that if Yuri Andropov had not died, do you think he could have saved the Soviet Union? It's not my question.
Well, he would die eventually anyway. I
Yeah.
mean, okay, so there are two questions, I think. If he lived long enough to be alive in 91,
Hmm.
maybe. It's definitely a possibility. But I think the Soviet Union dissolved not because of the lack of the leadership, not because of the uh, lack of the KGB activity. It's lost the propaganda war, I think, and it was economically undermined very much by the West. So on the one hand, you by the late 80s and early 90s, we we had a very weak economy, which well, not weak economy. It was not very productive. We had an enormous weapon industrial complex, and we couldn't quite address the needs of the population in terms of, for example, cars, clothes, some simple things. There was no shortage of, well, sometimes there were deficits. You couldn't just go and buy a car, for example. You had to stand in line for a car for some maybe decade or more. But that's on one hand. On the other hand, the Western propaganda, it did work. It's silly to deny that. The people idolized the Western way of life as they perceived it through the media, through the message of the media that came through the Iron Curtain. So they wanted to you know, to live much more comfortable lives with no side effects that come from it, if you catch my drift. I mean, they were presented a picture which looked much brighter, much better than what they were seeing around. And yeah, they fell for it. And no leader, I think, could. It's okay. So let's take Northern Korea. Why is it still there? I mean,
Well, that's a really complicated question. I mean, I could offer
yes,
my,
and
my
the
point of view, but
Soviet Union was also a complicated issue, had complicated issues. But I mean, I think the single most important reason for Northern Korea still existing is the strict censorship of any
outside influence.
outside influence, because the contrast is so deep, so sharp, that the people would, I think, okay, so the message of the communism, in my opinion, the message, not the realization, the idea, is actually more fair, more ethical, more moral than the message of capitalism, especially the unregulated capitalism that maybe the U.S. is proud of. I'm not an expert in these things, so I may be wrong, but okay, I think that the exploitation of human by another human is wrong. I think that people have the right to basic needs, and to at least paid vacation time and so on. The message is more ethical, but actually the opposite message that the people in Soviet Union were getting from the outside influence was not a complete picture of what is the alternative to that. They they saw the marketing bullshit. They didn't get all the finer print, if you understand what I'm saying. And now we can see that it was actually maybe worth reading the fine print, because, okay, in terms of quality of life, yes, it's improved dramatically since the late 80s, when the economy was very unbalanced, should I say it. But why? Actually, the most important factor was the oil price, which skyrocketed like in 100, no, not 100. I think it's from $5 a barrel to $150 a barrel. Okay, the economy received so much money that even with all the corruption going on, with all the inefficiency going on, something still trickled down to the common people. But what I'm trying to say is the model is actually not so important. What is much more important is the competent people in the government at the head of the state. One can present strong arguments for the communism, against the communism, for capitalism, against capitalism, for something in between, against everything, for anarchism. I don't know. This is not a settled question as far as I understand. There is no a perfect model for everyone. And what's important is, if okay, to get to the point, the economy of the Soviet Union, of course, was very different from the economy of Russian Federation today in model. But if the Soviet Union's economy enjoyed $150 per barrel oil price, I think it would still be here. So it's a very complicated question, and Yuri Andropov is not the magic man that would single-handedly, just fixed everything.
Yeah, I get it. Well, like I said, it wasn't my question. My friend just asks every Russian he meets this question. I don't know if he's being serious or not, but as a matter of respect to him, I asked you the question. So there you go.
Well, I have tried to answer to the best of my ability. Sorry if it wasn't concise. It's not a simple question.
No.
I could jokingly answered it in simple terms, but I took it serious. I think it's what this question deserves.
Yeah, no, I totally get that. Well, we've covered a decent amount of topics. I mean, there's always room for more, but it is getting late, of course.
Yes.
So, are there any? I mean, try to wrap this up a bit. So, anything that you really want to mention before we end this?
Really meant to mention. So, yes, I will try to not get distracted this time. I am not to repeat myself. I am not a patriot of Russia, but I respect my country. not for some reasons that are ideological, but for some some resilience, some ability to, despite all odds, I mean, do some good in the world. I think there are things that Russia does that are good. I could name a few, but maybe I shouldn't, because it would be lengthy. I am not, proud to be Russian. I think it's a silly notion, but I have respect for Russia, well, for some reasons or another, and I don't think that it's fair to just either demonize it outright and paint it black, and or dismiss it as a loser in the Cold War, and that's it. So Russia, who
Yeah,
cares?
I totally understand that, and I think it's good to have a kind of, well, you have to have a relatively nuanced perspective on these things. I mean, if only because black and white rarely serves to illustrate the truth and accuracy in the best possible way. So I think
Yeah.
it's a good attitude to have. I mean, I'm no American patriot either. I'm just, it's a circumstance that you're born into, and that's pretty much it. So you got to be critical of that circumstance, and there are always positives and negatives. So yeah.
Yeah, that's pretty much what I've been trying to say all along.
Yeah.
To acknowledge the picture in the whole, not just something you want to, and to not acknowledge something you don't want to.
Yeah. Okay, well, thank you very much for having this conversation. I really appreciate it.
Yes, thank you. It was a great pleasure to be able to talk to you. I'm a
I'm
huge
sure I'm going to
fan.
butcher the Russian, but spasiba. Spasiba.
Пожалуйста.
Okay.
And well, if the you would find it interesting, preferable to continue this conversation, I am always available. Just
Okay.
to
Well, I appreciate that offer, and I think the audience will let it be known as well. So, everyone, thanks for tuning in, and thank you for listening to this perspective about Russia, and we will check you out later. If you liked this video, please like, share, and subscribe. And if you enjoy my content, please consider making a donation or becoming a patron. Thanks for watching.